So, Australia's got this big plan. A world-first social media ban for anyone under 16. The goal? To protect kids. Sounds simple enough, right? But as we're about to see, this Online Safety Act forces us to ask a really important question. Is this whole thing really about protection, or is it about control?
And this is the official line from the government. You'll hear this a lot. They frame it as their fundamental duty, to step in and shield the most vulnerable from all the bad stuff online. I mean, who's going to argue with keeping kids safe? It's a really powerful emotional goal.
And that's where we need to start digging, because every single policy has a price, and a lot of the time, the real cost is buried deep in the fine print. So what exactly are Australians going to have to give up for the sake of this so-called safety?
Okay, let's start with the promise. The big idea here is to create a shield for children, protecting them from everything from those super addictive algorithms to content that's just, well, not for kids.
So the plan itself is pretty straightforward. Come December 2025, no more social media accounts for anyone under 16. And we're talking the big ones: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. If they don't play ball, they get hit with massive fines. It's a very hard line in the sand.
But how do you actually enforce a ban on kids without affecting everyone else? Well, this brings us to that hidden price I mentioned. The mechanism to make it all work is something people are starting to call a digital passport.
And here it is. This is the absolute core of the issue. You can't block kids from using a platform unless you can positively identify every single adult. To prove you're over 16, every single person, you, me, your grandparents, is going to have to formally verify their age. Not just for social media, but maybe even for search engines. Online anonymity as we know it could just vanish.
So how are they going to do this? Well, we're not just talking about ticking a box that says you're over 18. Nope. Platforms will need to collect some of our most sensitive data imaginable: biometric facial scans, copies of our driver's licenses, our passport details, and all of this gets handed over to private third-party companies. Now, you might be thinking this is just a hypothetical risk. It is not. When the UK tried a similar thing, the consequences were immediate. I'm talking within 24 hours, scammers had already set up fake sites to trick people into handing over their private documents, and that data was leaked almost instantly.
And let's be totally honest about Australia's own track record here. We've had over 5,500 data breaches in just the last 5 years. So are we really prepared to create these massive, juicy new databases filled with every adult's ID and then hand control over to private companies? It really does feel like a disaster just waiting to happen.
Okay, so moving beyond the technology and the data risks, we have to ask an even more important question. Who is actually going to be wielding all this new power? Who gets to sit in the judge's chair and decide what's safe and what isn't?
At the very center of all this is the eSafety Commissioner. On paper, it's described as a world-first agency, totally dedicated to our online safety, and it has some serious power to enforce these new laws.
But critics in Parliament are painting a very, very different picture. They're using words like eSafety Commissar, arguing that the job has morphed from protecting people into policing wrongthink. The fear is that this is really about censorship, giving one unelected bureaucrat the power to decide what ideas Australians are allowed to see online. And if you look at who's actually advising on these technology trials, well, one member of the board is Melinda Tancred-Reist. Critics have described her group, Collective Shout, as censorious and sexually repressive. They've campaigned against everything from video games to women's clothing choices. Her involvement, well, it raises some pretty serious questions about the ideological agenda that might be driving these safety measures.
So this really brings us to the heart of the matter. This whole thing isn't really about tech, is it? It's a clash of fundamental principles: the desire for safety versus the necessity of personal freedom. This quote from the Senate floor just nails the dilemma perfectly. Nobody, and I mean nobody, is arguing against protecting kids. The real question is whether the solution being proposed, a system that requires the constant surveillance and identification of every single adult, is a price that we're willing to pay.
And to really understand the stakes, you just have to look at something like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It literally enshrines the freedom of association. In our digital world, social media is the main way we assemble. It's our town square. Restricting access to it isn't some small technicality. It directly impacts internationally recognized human rights.
During the parliamentary debates, one powerful metaphor was used over and over again: The idea that this law, which is being presented as this wonderful gift to protect our children, is actually a Trojan horse, a way to sneak a system of mass surveillance and censorship right into the heart of society, all under a friendly, benevolent disguise.
So let's be really clear about what critics are saying is under threat here. We're talking about fundamental human rights, your freedom of expression, your right to assemble with people online, your freedom of thought, and your basic right to privacy. They argue all of it could be on the chopping block.
Okay, so this all sounds pretty serious. But it's not just some theoretical debate happening in a faraway parliament. There are actual, concrete things you can do to protect your own digital life.
First, it's really important to note there are other options on the table. For example, there's something called a duty of care model. It wouldn't ban users. Instead, it would legally require the big platforms to make their systems safer by design. See the difference? The responsibility shifts from you having to prove who you are to them having to fix their broken systems. It targets the algorithms, not the users.
Now for a really practical step. I'd seriously consider backing up your social media data before that December 2025 deadline hits. You can find the export tool right in your account settings on places like Facebook and Instagram. It lets you download everything, all your photos, your messages, your memories, and save it all offline where you control it.
Another great tool is a VPN, which stands for Virtual Private Network. The easiest way to think about it is like a secure encrypted tunnel for all your internet traffic. It hides your location and scrambles your data, making it way harder for anyone to watch what you're doing online.
So, to quickly recap the big action points, back up your data now. Think about using a VPN for your day-to-day browsing. Be incredibly careful about who you give your personal ID to online. And finally, if any of this concerns you, contact your local MP and let them know. That's a fundamental part of how our democracy is supposed to work.
Ultimately, all of this brings us back to one single critical question. Pretty much everyone agrees that online safety is essential, but who should get to define what safety actually means? And what price are we, as a society, really willing to pay to get it? That's the question we all need to be thinking about.